So then we are back with more understandings from the time of the Second Tabernacle services, or refined Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Tzayelic lineage. So then we can understand the time of the end. As per Yeshayahu the prophet, we find layers of understanding of the spring feast, the Aurum feast, and also the returning of the cities of the Hamashiach laid waste from many centuries. Reading from Yeshayahu the prophet, it's very important, dealing with the prophet and the prophecies. From the original manuscripts, we find then the Hebrew, the Paleo-Hebrew, is the best source of information regarding then revelation. It's sorting these many interpretations caused by so many translations because of congregations wanting to make money, and also the trade of religion. Now then, the scripture is very clear, and the scripture does not make a distinction of people's capacity of doing what is proper. Now then, as far as the scripture and what the Hamashiach ben Yosef has said, what was the main point when the Hamashiach ben Yosef was explaining the situations regarding the kingdom to come? Now then, for the moment, Shimon, he said very precisely that each person should be concerned with the salvation of his own soul. Now, nobody talks of the salvation of the spirit. So a lot of people simply they don't understand the distinction from spirit and soul. Now, because of this factor, when the Hamashiach ben Yosef was explaining sections of what kingdom to come was, and what the people wanted from him during his time of service, why was then the Hamashiach ben Yosef so contrary of what the people of the time wanted? Now then, it's always important understanding what is tradition and what is the true understanding of the scripture. Now, it's very easy for a person to get a certificate of pastorship and go around and talking, and it's simply a form of deceit, because truly salvation does not come directly from a translation, but it comes as a walk with the divine. So because people don't spend the time in the scripture, and rarely they study it, the natural fact is then when people should read Revelation and understand the prophecies, why then it's so hard when people give themselves to their own pleasures And then there is a distant understanding always informing that some actions, some habits are dangerous. Now, some people drink, some people they get in strange relationships, some people get in habits that are absolutely destructive. But every time there is an understanding of the scripture, there is a very distant voice always pointing to some sort of understanding beyond the translations given. Now, many people, they go to church and they don't become part of it. It's only a habit. Some people, they go to church, they get criticized because of what they wear, or the hairdo, or because the color of the carpet. So then not every person is walking in the same line where the Hamashiach wanted. Now then, is it wrong wanting to make a choice on the color of the carpet? Is it wrong of having hairdo or color of shoes? Now then, Revelation informs the ending of the world, the ending of this age. Now then, our country was founded in a very strong foundation when the first pilgrims left Europe and came to this land. Now in Revelation there is a record of this fact, because the scripture uses geographical area in a spiritual understanding. So then the world reading it, hearing it, cannot understand. Now then, the angel spoke with Daniel, and he informed that later times, then those who are wise wilt understand. So then, trying to understand from the viewpoint of the prophet, in expecting situations to take place centuries in the future, was there a way of informing what those places were? Or it was so generic that nobody can understand it? Now, based from these, there is a character situation that should obviously be discovered. And not every person has the character of the scripture. That's why some people, they go to lengths saying, but doesn't state this country or the other country. Of course not. The scripture wasn't meant to give you names and places in the future. It shows those who are pagan, those who are not pagan. Now then, sections of the scripture from the viewpoint of the prophet. What was then the main point when the prophet mentioned a place in the future a place of a kingdom, a place of a tabernacle. What was truly the aim of the prophet? Understandably, centuries later, the Mashiach then was also pointing to the same prophecies. And then both prophets were mentioning Revelation. So from point to point, the Holy Scripture from the time of Abraham never changed. The editions did change quite a few portions of the Scripture, and there is a natural fact, because the persecution of the people were so severe that they couldn't maintain at times Scripture, save if they were placing them in a secured place. And then there is the Second Temple period, where then the Ark of the Holy Covenant was not in the Second Temple period. So this is the darkest moment of the nation, because they only had the prophecies. Yet the Holy Ark and the presence of the divine was stored in a cave for a period of time. So the storing of the Ark of the Covenant simply means that the presence of the divine was not encountered during the time of the Second Temple period, because the divine had said so, not because anybody is reading or understanding. It's because the divine said. Now then, in Maccabeus, second chapter, second Megillah of, there is a portion that the divine speaks with Yirmiyahu. There is a portion where then the divine speaks during the time of the building of the first temple. And there is a presence when then the Ark of the Holy Covenant was placed in the cave. The prophets were the only people at the time that have a true link with the divine. A true and absolutely unwavering link with the divine. It could not be broken by any way. Now then, when we ourselves, we don't maintain a lifestyle that is in line with the holy instructions, people can't have a link with the divine. Because the first objective of a person is walking with the divine Scripture and walking and understanding the prophecies. The name is the personal conquering of sin. That's one of the hardest. Now then, going to church, congregations, or thinking and going somewhere to read the Scripture, and then they go back and live dirty lifestyles. Truly, it doesn't help much regarding the walk that each person should have during these times of crisis. Now then, what nations they hold so importantly in their opinion, such as the economy of a country, there is another player playing a vital role in the world's economy. Now then, changing the understanding from tabernacling and why the Hamashiach said what he said regarding the kingdom, regarding revelation, the prophets, and why people they don't get together to read the original manuscripts. Now then, the example is given in Revelation chapter 20, where obviously there is no chronological order of this particular chapter, because a few verses is linked with a certain content of the prophets, the other few verses is linked with another portion of the other scripture of another prophet, in another portion of another prophet. So because the confusing state of the people and their refusal of reading the original manuscripts and learning, then is what the Hamashiach compared as the waves of the sea. The Mashiach himself, when he was talking and explaining, or then the representative during the time of the restoration of the Torah, when the spring feast was then completed, the most important point when the Hamashiach was explaining these particular sections, it's simply pointing what is coming then in the future. Now then, what is then tabernacling? What does it mean then in the 20th chapter? Then when the time of 1,000 years was completed, then the Hashatan was released from his prison. What does it mean? What about the 1,000 years? Then the Mashiach would reign in the earth. Now then, understandably, when talking of kingdom, how can a person find the information regarding a link of Metchiach, the 24th chapter, and the completion of Revelation? Is it a mere fact of reading only? Does it have any spiritual link with layers from nation to nation? And why then Yohanan was writing portions that was given as a revelation of the Mashiach if it was revealed by the prophets? Now then, during the time of the Second Temple period, there was the lack of the presence of the divine, but they were truly emphasizing the prophecies. That's the reason why when the Hamashiach came, or the representative of the period of the spring feast came, they simply could not recognize him because they were far away from the presence of the divine for centuries. That's why when the Hamashiach was explaining, if you would become knowledgeable of the scripture, they should obviously listen of what he was saying. The reason why they didn't is because they didn't have the presence, because the presence wasn't amongst them for centuries. So then a similar situation is related with the translation of Revelation. A lot of portions of Revelation simply does not exist. Now then, there is the wish of certain events of the future that they simply don't exist, yet they record on paper. Certain portions of the scripture during the time of the Second Temple period was modified. Now then, this modification reflects a certain content that does not change the character of the divine given the true scripture. When the divine is said that he changes not, these are the portions of the scripture where then the spirit of the divine leads. Whatsoever is made a change is not related with the divine. Now, granted that a lot of changes were taking place because they were captive in many kinds and many forms of systems, and the scripture had to go through periods of changes. Now, when people have swords in their necks, then truly the very existence of the people then is at harm's way. Now then, the situation regarding the Second Temple period and Revelation, they are somewhat related regarding the content modified. But the divine presence of the scripture through the prophets, they never change. So then, Revelation. Firstly, Yohanan did not have any kind of a vision on his own. What helped him was the study of the scripture previously given. These were the basis. Now then, when people don't study the Torah, they don't study the prophecy, they don't understand where the nation was coming from, where they were going, why did they do this, why is adapted during this period. sometimes they can't detect. It's because the people, they were in grave danger. Now, some people, they are very easy saying, but if you have faith, then you should face death and don't change the scripture. It's not that simple. So then, understandably, these scriptures that were modified does not change the divine character of what should understand from this period of time. This particular section of Yohanan reflects also regarding the 24 elders and then living creatures that comes from Yitzkehel, and also saw a throne, and the spirits of the divine does not sit on thrones. Understandably, it is a great force that exists and understands, but is not truly the image of a person where then in a physical form it would sit. Now then, there is a mixing of kingship and divine. Thus then, the wish of what they wished for the future versus the presence of the divine. Thus then, we understand when there is human literary activity, there is a portion of the scripture stating the wishes of the people for the future. There are portions that were simply modified, and there are portions that are absolutely divine. Now then, Moshe, obviously, he had help from Jethro. And Jethro was from the lineage of Cain. So those people who have a tendency of becoming judgmental of other people, always concerned with someone else's life and they don't take care of their very own, what has the Hamashiach ben Yosef explained regarding this situation? So the prophets, when they prophesied, a lot of them were prophesying of nations, they're prophesying of circumstances, they're prophesying of people yet in the future that would come. But the main point of this long explanation, it's because the understanding of the spiritual dynamics of revelation is somewhat complicated. Mostly so when people don't take the time to study the scripture. Yet they projected themselves as saved, yet they don't understand the scripture that brings salvation and structure. Thus then the problem of what the scriptures are saying versus what people are wishing for the future. Now the divine is not going to grant the wishes of the people if it's not recorded on his scripture. Thus we understand these as traditions. Now then, it came a point in the life of the Hamashiach that they want to destroy him, as the other prophets were destroyed. Yirmiyah was sent to Egypt. Nobody heard of him anymore. Yeshayah was sawn in half. Other prophets was slain. So when we read the scripture, we should not spiritualize if our lives are not in order. Thinking that these great giants of the scripture and so on and so forth, thinking that is a divine situation that makes everything easy and prosperous. Now then, the scripture explains the situation regarding, and after these things he heard a loud voice from a great multitude in heaven, and then saying, deliverance and strength. Now then, these are not words but functions. Now then, it doesn't explain the tetragram. That's another problem. Elohim is a generic title. So, deliverance, strength, these are functions. So, simply, the revelation is combining the presence of the divine and the multi-functions thereof. But does not use the specific tetragram. Now then, people that are reading the scripture, since they generalize the whole situation, they think that L-O-R-D is some sort of a name of sorts. And it truly is a title. The title given for the British landowners. Now some people, but that's not my understanding of L-O-R-D. The scripture is not making distinction of people understand of L-O-R-D. Divine is expecting people to understand the original manuscripts and where it's from. Now then, L-O-R-D simply in the scripture does not exist. This is a title used by the English when they translated the original manuscripts. That's what the language decided to use. Other language uses sirs or senor or monsignor or don. So L-O-R-D means nothing. And then comes that fight, because it does not mean to you, but it means to someone else, but it's not talking of someone else. L-O-R-D is a simple title. That's why people don't understand Revelation. They don't understand the prophecies. They don't understand the future. They don't understand the spirit of prophecies. So then, there is a equivalent of this name in the original manuscript. Now, understandably, a lot of translations were translated from the Greco language. 10 times worse yet. Some of the scripture, unfortunately, were modified because they don't have the culture of Hebrew. So the natural understanding is they're going to use words they are related with their own culture. And unfortunately, their culture is pagan. He's in a situation of a choice, reading this scripture, reading the other scripture, understanding this language, because the divine understands everybody, so or we find then the divine ordering his people to read and understand his word in the morning, during lunchtime, at night, when you wake up, when you go to bed, when you have lunch, every time and always. Now, there are people who are in a spiritual state of completely lazy. They only expect the divine gives and gives and gives and gives, and nobody spends time on the word. And then there is our country is in a ruinous situation. The economy is busted. Now they're expecting some sort of a divine nature to come and organize it. What are these people are voting for? People with the absolute wrong record of stealing, and then expected them to take care of the economy. But the point from this particular scripture of Revelation, why there is so much going on, and speaking of Shimon, and then the Mashiach, and then the prophets, Yirmiyahu, Yeshayahu, Ezekiel, Daniel, because each of these layers is then combined. If you don't understand simultaneously these situations, a person won't ever understand Revelation. Now, if a computer does not have the basic form of gathering information, you won't be able to type in the data that you are searching for and expect an answer. The divine, the scripture works the same way. There they are. People are typing the information on their Bibles there. They can get the data from. Of course. They are dealing with a system that is scandalized. Now, granted, some nations, they simply can't have the same translation. It's not part of their culture. But does not make the person to walk straight in the path. Now there is China is coming, and there is another visit taking place this year in China, where they are going to link a whole lot more, many countries in their system. Now then there is another situation, the spirit of the dragon, that is coming through the system and linking the nations. Yet people trying to simply detach themselves from the main point of the whole situation. They give themselves to those traditions of the future. They simply don't exist. And there it is. Our nation is ruined. But everybody's doing the same thing as before in terms of the spiritual understanding of the scriptures, and they want another result. That's why the original manuscripts are very important. Because when we type in our spiritual understanding what we want from the prophecies, then we understand. Now, if people don't spend the time in the Word, they don't understand the original language, they don't study the culture, then they ask questions, they don't have any answers. And whatsoever answers they receive, it's not from the divine, it's from a deceitful spirit. It's amazing how people, simple understanding is this. Next time I'm going to evaluate more of these from the enlightenment of Revelation, known as Galah, Daniel, and then Yeshayahu. So please stay tuned, much more coming up.